is Rick Levinson. He's the executive editor for AARP Media. He supervises coverage of personal finance, money, retirement, work issues. Very happy to have a journalist in the room. He's held editing positions at lots of different platforms and publications, and so he's been following press media coverage of retirement issues for quite a long time. He's going to talk this morning about myths of retirement coverage, so I'm looking forward to learning a little something. Rick, take it away.
All right, thanks very much. Thanks for having me. First off, a disclaimer, I'm not representing AARP Media, or AARP, the organization, so I can't really be quoted as that. I am, if you need to quote me for some reason, I am an RIA, I can be quoted as that, but I'm not speaking for the organization. This is really sort of an opinion session because of the place where I find myself, where it's the center for questions of these kinds of things, and my own demographic. I mean, I'm in that age group that that's all we worry about from day to day, so it's of particular importance to me. So it won't be heavily on facts, it's more just things that I've noticed, and if I can impart some of that with you, maybe just as a different way to frame the conversation over the next 3 days as you talk to some of these people, because you're going to hear from a lot of different industry people, and my sense is that they all more or less have something to sell. So you really have to be kind of a skeptic when you hear this stuff, because it's all going to look very good, and it can be, but you also have to come at it from the point of view that all right, where's the gotcha here? Because I found too many times over the years that there's always a gotcha. Let me back up for a second. How many of you are covering these issues now, or is it all new to you? Are, because I read it. So some, but not all.
I mean, you mean as a regular reader? Just
Right.
One. Okay.
Or it's personal finance or money or retirement. So everybody is sort of in that wheelhouse. So some of this you probably already know, but I guess the question is, do we have a crisis now? And I was just talking to Bob before, and the idea was, if you have money, there's no crisis. If you don't have any money, it's a crisis. So I don't know that necessarily has changed at all, but there seems to be a confluence of stuff of how did we get here, and you probably heard a little bit about that before, but does anyone want to throw out why it's a problem now, maybe more than other times?
Well, I think I'm from Detroit,
Right.
so in our age group, people that we cover, some of the things that were promised to people are being cut in retirement as well. Like healthcare is going up quite a bit for people coverage, and with the bankruptcy, the city of Detroit bankruptcy, their pensions will be cut in retirement.
Right.
So that is an issue. Things that were promised, I guess, aren't there.
Right. That's definitely one of them. Anybody else?
People are living longer and saving less.
Right. Well, that was where I was going to start. Remember that guy in New York who ran for governor? He said the rent's too damn high. That was his platform. Well, we're living just too damn long now. That's what's happened. And the systems weren't created for that. If you go back 20 years or 30 years, if you made it to 65, the likelihood you probably wouldn't get to 75. Now, if you make it to 65, I forget what the actuaries say exactly, but likelihood is you're going to live 20 years and maybe 30 years. So you're talking in lots of cases that you're going to live in so-called retirement almost as long as you were working. And to me, that's an impossible structure. You can't just, you can't do it. And yet there'll be people out there telling you that it's possible to do. I don't see how that is. So that would be one way I'd want you to start thinking about that we have to reframe what we call retirement, because the old, the gold watch and the golf course thing, that's kind of out the door. And a lot of people who study age issues now are saying, it used to be you had what they call the education phase, the accumulation phase, and then the retirement phase. And the new thinking is now there's going to be a blend of all that. That as you age, you're going to have all three things going on at a time. You may never stop learning, and you may never stop working. And you never, so retirement isn't just, I've hung up my shoes and I'm sitting back, because I don't think people can make it, despite what other people may tell you. I don't think that's a realistic outcome. Other things that have happened now, and probably you've heard this before, the responsibility for savings has now fallen on our backs. If you go back, a generation or two, you worked, you got a pension, probably had Social Security. There was less debt, although even on the pension side of things, It was never universal. My dad didn't have a pension. Nobody that he worked with had a pension. So it was never universal, but for a lot of people it was something. So it's something they never thought about. Now, you have to be an actuary. You have to figure out how long you have to live. You have to plan for your retirement. You have to be an education expert because you have to somehow figure out how to pay for your kids' education. You have to be a medical expert because now in a lot of cases you may have to fund your own health care or plan for it in retirement. So you turn in your own personal money manager, and I think that's a big shift, that people in the past didn't have to worry about lots of those kinds of things, and now they do. You have pensions, benefits that are getting cut. I know in a lot of places that I'd worked, Dow Jones for one, they had retiree health care. If you reach a certain combination, I think it was the rule of 80. If your age and years of service got to 80, you got retiree health care. That's out there. Well, I never would have made it, but had I, it would have been great. But that's gone. That stuff is just all gone, and it's continuing to go. You can look at the trend line, pensions in another 10 or 15, 10 years will pretty much just be gone. So that's another thing that's changed. The kind of jobs we're doing now, and this gets into a broader, economic thing. We had, sort of basic manufacturing, wage, where you could work for a long time in basic kinds of industries. That's all gone away. With the shift to technology and part-time work and contract work, that's all shifting, lack of benefits. So the whole workplace is changed again. My dad worked at the company he worked at for, 35 years. And it could have gone elsewhere, but never really had to. And I think probably those stories would echo, in your own families. You'd see people, they worked at maybe one or two places. Now, if you looked at my background, I was at one place for 18 years, and then since then I've been at 6 different places. Mostly my choice, but not always. But that's just the nature of how journalism is changing. As traditional media implodes and new things come up, you're going to be job shifting a lot more, which also hurts you in terms of trying to build up benefits. The other things this is what I call, sort of the perfect storm of things that have really affected the retirement conversation. I think it's debt too, both housing and education. I looked the other day what it cost for me to go to college in real dollars then, and what it is now. It would have been about 14 grand, and of course now it's 3 or 4 times that. So families are finding themselves just in this incredible sinkhole, both in terms of education and housing debt too. To buy a house now, the house my parents bought. Anybody want to guess what that cost them?
For $13,000.
Very close. It was 19.5. So, and I guess we could do the math in the real dollars, but it's still, it's still pretty low sum. And they lived happily there for 30 years, and it was great. But you can't do that anymore. So the dynamics have changed. People, not only you have to fund your retirement, your medical care, your education, you also have to deal with this sort of crushing debt. So I think all of that coming together has created sort of a sense of crisis or fear. And I think for a lot of people, it's well-founded. The other stat that struck me, people are now retiring really fast, or they're reaching the age of retirement. I think you've probably heard this one before. I think it's 10,000 baby boomers a day are turning it. So there's going to be this huge crush of people out there that are of retirement age. They may want to continue working. They may not be able to, either for health or age discrimination. So all this is coming together in ways that I don't think have totally played out, and people don't know how this is going to look in 10 or 15 years. So that's kind of how we got here. One of the myths I think that's out there about the conversation again is, you'll hear this a lot. It's people say, I'm going to run out of money. And if you have Social Security in this country, you will never run out of money unless the system goes under, but we'll get to that. You will never run out of money. You may not have enough money. You may be spending too much, but that's a different conversation. But you'll get pitched that a lot from the retirement industry, because that's how they sell things. It's a fear that you're going to run out of money. That's not going to happen. You may run out of savings if you spend too much, or you need to adjust your spending. And that's really, I think, another way that I would urge you to kind of rethink the conversation. I really think it starts with spending, and then savings is a part of it, but I don't think people spend any time really thinking about what they spend. How many of you have budgets? And you all should, because you're all right. So it's not even universal here. If you go out into the general population, you find it's pretty known. People just don't know what they spend.
Doesn't that whole attitude belong on the list of the big changes we've had? Because, I mean, we heard earlier that people didn't used to retire at all, they just worked until they died.
Right.
And then we created Social Security, and by the 70s, we had pretty much cured old age poverty. But now I read that, financial advisors used to say, plan on having 65% of your old income. Well, the baby boomers want 100 to 110% of their old income because they want to travel, they want to have a second home.
Right.
So isn't our new expectations a big part of the issue? This idea that we're going to not only be able to quit working, but actually live really well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is certainly part of it. And here are all different kind of numbers. What's the right number? Is it 65? Is it 80? The higher you get, sometimes they're not accounting for taxes, which could be lower in retirement, or not
Do
possibly.
you think that is also part of the industry, that we're being sort of encouraged to save or to replace 85% of our income pre-retirement, when in fact maybe we could get by with much less?
Sure. Look, they stand to make money. The more money you have with them, the more money they make. So the more you save, it's kind of a win-win for them, because they can say, look, you're better set for retirement, and now we have more assets under management. And I think, again, this idea is, I don't think there's a firm understanding of really what people are going to spend throughout retirement, because, and we'll get to some of that too, because healthcare costs, the unreimbursed ones, are a huge factor in that, and of course your age. So again, going back to this idea, you have to be your own personal actuary, how long you're going to live, and none of us really know that. So yeah, I think that gets back to the discussions. People may have unrealistic expectations about what they can do in retirement and how far dollars will go. And again, I think it comes back to they don't have an accurate picture of spending. I mean, I look every year and I'm kind of stunned, and this goes beyond. And I'm sorry if I'm rattling a little, but stop me, and please, if you have questions at any point. I look every year to see where my spending is, and wow, 60% of it, at least for me, is housing and taxes. I have to pay estimated taxes, unfortunately, because I live in an AMT area. So it's huge. So what, it's not cutting out the lattes, which you'll see a lot of people say, oh, you cut out the latte. That's fine, but you really have to look at the big numbers that you can cut back. And I think housing's one of the big ones that you can cut, and some tax strategies.
So are you saying when you say housing, are you talking about mortgage or rent as opposed to mortgage, rent, utilities, et cetera, et cetera? Well,
all that, the big one is it could either be rent or what your sort of your monthly nut. I mean, utilities, depending where you live, there isn't, if you live in the Northeast and you're stuck with heating oil, there isn't much you can do about it,
Except get
turn
a
it
smaller
down.
house.
Yeah, get a smaller house, or turn it down to 50 and wear a lot of sweaters. So, but you can cut your housing nut, and that's, I think a lot of people don't. They say, I want to age in place, I want to live in this house, and I bought it 4 years ago, so I have this gigantic mortgage, and I have no, how am I going to cover that? And that's where you get into trouble, I think.
So is it 10,000 baby boomers that they are retiring, or they're hitting retirement?
They're hitting retirement. They're not
Hitting
retiring.
retirement age.
Right.
So they're not actually.
No.
Okay.
Well, I think more wind up retiring than want to. We'll touch on that in a
So do you
second.
think that there's this contradictory message that's being sent, that's both, you're not going to have any money, but what you want to save is as much to maintain a same or better lifestyle? So people are getting this double message, when the message should be, you'll still have some money, but you better, because I mean, since we know most people don't have anywhere near enough money, they're probably going to need to retire, even in a somewhat comfortable situation. Right. It's a hard message to say, don't worry about that.
Right.
You're being oversold that.
Right.
But you're saying we're getting this sort of this double contradictory message.
I think we are, and I think there's a reality check that needs to go on, and it's not pleasant. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear bad news. They don't want to hear good news, and you'll be told often, hey, you can start now, and it's all going to be great. And yeah, it'll be better, but it's still not be great. It just really, it's going to depend on your individual circumstance, and I think we're still haven't really dealt with the realities of how to do that. I mean, everybody's saying, oh, there's a crisis out there, but no one's, outside of simple things like, oh, save more, no one's really come up with a solution on how this is going to look 10 or 15 years down the road. And that's the way I would want you to reframe the conversation. I remember I was at Bloomberg at the time, this was during the financial crisis, and all these guys would come in, and I'm sorry to keep picking on the fund companies and stuff, but they're kind of an easy target. They're going, well, it's down 40%. You're just going to people are going to have to work longer. I said, work longer? I mean, the unemployment rate's 10%. I can't even get a Walmart greeter job, so how are they going to work longer? Well, they're going to have to work longer. You know, they just had the script, and there was no sort of variant until you really pressed and said, well, you know, I guess they're screwed. You know, at the end, which you were. If you had to retire in those years, I'm sorry, that is the reality. So you can talk about how to work through that and repair it, but that is the reality. I mean, there's just no getting around it. If you had 40% less and you had to start withdrawing, yeah, there's no easy way to fix that. And what's happened is that it's sort of left everybody scarred, particularly young people. I just sort of started Friday saying, you know, that the millennials are way underinvested in the stock market and they're sitting around in cash because they saw what happened and they're nervous and they don't want to do that again. So, are you in the stock market? I mean, you may not be a millennial.
I am. I'm a millennial. Yep.
All right.
But
Majority?
but
What
yeah.
percentage?
How much do I put into my
Well,
401k?
No,
Or-
what percentage of
Oh.
your assets would you say are in the stock market? As
20.
opposed to cash? 20. So where's the rest?
Well, it's in savings, and that's true. Like there's a confidence level that
Right.
this generation lacks in investing. But
And that is a problem because, you know, at 20% in the market, unless you hit the lottery or, you know, invent a great app, you know, the
Yeah.
chances are everyone can make it. And the thing that she has that I don't, and some other people in this room, you've got all these years. You've got years of investing time ahead so you can recoup these things. Look, I didn't pull out in 2008, and I was sitting there watching the thing on the screens every day, and it was pretty scary. But in 3 years later, I went up. My portfolio was up 30%. I didn't touch it. You know, I didn't touch it because I was too scared to touch it, and I had an advisor.
30% from what it was, or recovered by 30%?
It was up 30%. It had recovered 30%, so it went up. It had to recover what it lost and then go
And
up
then went up.
30%. So it was huge, and that was, you know, because I didn't pull the stuff out. Though I was, you know, I was nervous as everybody else, and you know, I looked at the balance and said, all right, I guess I'm working longer. You know, just that was the new reality. So those are, I think, stories you'd want to go back and sort of, you know, drill home with readers. That's really, you know, that's a problem.
You think people are scared of equities when they should be? They're too nervous about it.
Yeah, I think they're scared of investing generally, whether it is equities or bonds or something else. I would stay away from alternatives, and I'll get to that too. But yeah, I think there's a real fear. And of course, a lot of this conversation is framed on people who have money to invest.
Yeah,
There
I
are
was gonna say.
millions out there that don't have any money. They have no money to invest, and they're living paycheck to paycheck. And part of the problem, I was mentioning that to Bob earlier, nobody's really talking about them. You know, when you hear from investment services industries, they don't want to talk to them. There's no money there, and there's nothing to say for them. But it's a real issue for those people, and I don't know how they're going to get by. I mean, some of the programs like Myra and other things are designed to help them. I think, you know, default auto IRAs and 401ks are all helping, but a lot of people, even in those brackets, they don't have access to that. I think there's 35 or 40% of companies out there that still don't offer 401ks. So how about all those people, or people who are self-employed, or, you know, day laborers, those kinds of things? I mean, they have, you know, real problems, which Social Security was designed to help, but it's nowhere near. It's not going to be anywhere near enough to retire on. I mean, the average check, I think, is $12.50 now. And if you live in D.C., you couldn't even, that wouldn't even cover rent. You know, it just won't happen. So.
What are you hearing about Myra? Where is that at right now, and do you think that's gonna go through?
Well, you know, I think it's left with Treasury's thumping around trying to come up with regulations to make it, you know, to make it go. I mean, sure, look, I'm in favor of anything that gets people to save. Is it a great, you know, is it an answer? No. Is it a start? Sure. Okay. You know, why not? I mean, I think for people who have access to those things, they have access to better tools already. I think that the question is, how about people who don't have access to those things? And that's not going to cut it, I don't think. So what are people trying to do? Well, a lot of cases, they're trying to work longer. Well, then you run into age discrimination, which is a huge issue for us at AARP, and it's real. I mean, the stats are the older cohort now, the unemployment rate for them is lower than the general population. But what happens is if you lose a job, it's really hard to get one. You know, it's 44 to 50 weeks that the average is unemployed. And then I'm sure you've read the stories. I mean, a lot of people are just out for years, and a lot of them are worried that they'll never work again, and that's that could be a real fear. So I guess that also contributes to that mix. That, yeah, sure, you want to work longer, but you may not be able to get a job. And the other X factor is health. I think a lot of people want to work longer, just never factor in or that their health may decline, and it could go really fast. You can slip, get some ailment you didn't know, and the whole picture can change overnight. Whereas when you're younger, that's not as much a likelihood. And then the studies show that people think they want to retire later, and yet most of them don't. They all wind up taking Social Security early, which is another bad thing to do. I'm sure you've heard that already and written. The longer you can delay on that, it's probably the best return you can get on your money, and people don't do it. So another way of talking about the conversation is to really urge people who can to push that back. I mean, so many take it at 62, and they come with the attitude, well, it's my money. Suppose I die. I get gypped. Well, if you're dead, so what? That's what I'm saying. You're dead. Wow.
Still you're gypped.
Yeah. Come back from the grave. I mean, so what? I mean, the idea.
Social Security tries to play that out, that if you take it at 62 and you live to be 80, or you take it at 70 and you live to be 80, that you're still getting about the same amount of money.
Yeah, I mean,
You're
you can.
getting less on a monthly basis.
Well, and you can run the numbers. There is a crossover point, but if you have other resources, in
I
this.
think one of the things I think what Social Security and what people don't take into account when they do that is the earning power between 62 and 70 that they have.
Right.
And they don't include that. They think, oh, I've got to take this now, and just as you said.
Right, and it winds up getting taxed, and it's not, if you're still working, certainly you wouldn't want to take it. But for a lot of people, they just step off. They say, oh, got my money, I earned it, I want it, and, I think they're just, it's just a bad idea. So that's the myth about, running out of money. I mean, I don't think it's a savings as much as a spending as much as a savings conversation. The other thing that drives me nuts is, is any of this helpful?
Yes.
Sugar crash? No? Okay. Annuities. Most oversold and misunderstood product out there. They're sold on fear. And I say sold because people never buy them. They're always sold to you. They're incredibly complex. I don't know, how many of you have ever looked at one of these things? How many of you understood it of the two that looked at it? One. About how many of you have ever looked at one of the prospectuses? Actually physically looked at and
Buy it.
Yep. Did you understand it?
Not really.
Yeah.
But it just seemed like it took a big chunk of your money. And I-
Takes an incredible chunk of your money, but this is part of this conversation of fear that people are afraid of outliving their money, so they get sold it basically on the one thing that you'll never run out of money. What they don't realize is that for the X amount of years, they're just giving you your money back. You can go 10 or 15 years or longer. All you're getting back is your money that you gave them, and it could be years before you ever get anything from the insurance company. And the way they build these things, they'll say, oh, if the market goes up, if you buy an equity-linked annuity, for instance, if the market goes up X, you'll get Y, but you'll never go below X. Well, they cap this thing in such a bad way that you could do a lot better on your own. You could basically build your own annuity. Look, the basics of retiring, and if you want to break it down, let's say you have $100, okay, or $100,000, and you want to take 4%. Do the math, in 25 years, that's what you have. And you figure you're going to live for 25 years. That's what you're going to have. So the rest of it is just kind of bells and whistles. It's how do I maximize what I have for the amount of time I think I'm going to live? And I think, again, the conversations are framed so complexly that people don't really get what's going on. Oh, you need annuities and glide paths. And no, I think it's really a lot simpler than that. And if we sort of break it down to its essence, I think people can grasp it a lot better than they do generally because they're sold this stuff.
Since we're on the subject of annuities, and hopefully this is related, I've always wondered, how does that relate to like whole life and term life insurance?
Yeah, I would hate to quote Susie Orman because I don't think all that much of her, but she was on last night on NPR, pushing some fundraiser, and somebody asked her about it, and she actually made a valid point, which I sat up because generally I don't hear that often. She said, look, insurance is just to protect you against something going wrong.
Right.
if you want to invest, don't use an insurance product for it. And Alan Roth, who's a blogger that we use at AARP, he makes the same point. Don't confuse investing with insurance.
Right.
If you're young and you need insurance to replace income for family or a spouse, then buy term insurance. It's cheap, and you can ladder it. I mean, it's different. Again, that'd be another good story. There's different ladder. You can ladder the stuff if you need to, and save costs or spread out risk with different insurers. But as an investment, these whole life and universal that are sold to you, they're, in my view, they're not worth the money. You're going to spend a lot. A lot of it goes to premiums. They tout the cash value or tax advantages. You don't need all that. You can. It's better. Why not take the money and invest it yourself? All they're doing is putting it in the market. They're doing the same thing you could do, and you're getting another layer of fees on that, and it goes for years. And what happens is most people let this stuff run out, which an insurance company loves. That's the other dirty secret about them. Most of those whole life policies expire because people stop paying them. So in other industries growing up, how many are familiar with life settlements? It's another sort of questionable thing where these guys, they come to you and say, oh, you have $1 million whole life and you don't really need the policy. We'll buy it for $200,000. And then they go and broker it to some investor and say, if you buy it, you'll collect the $1 million when this guy goes. It's kind of ghoulish, but that's a whole industry out there, and insurance companies hate it because they claim it's not entirely legal, and because they know they're going to have to pay eventually. And you're the investor saying, okay, if this guy, if he kicks in 5 years, I get a great return. If he lives 20, it's not so great. So they spend a lot of time. They check out your health and all that stuff. But that's the same kind of thing. I mean, you really don't need those things. I don't.
But wait, why did life insurance would have to pay out anyhow? You're saying, what difference does it make to life insurance? Who has?
Well, because the policy generally would lapse. These people would say,
They
I don't
just
need the
wouldn't pay
money.
their premium.
They wouldn't pay the premium, so eventually it'll just
So you're
kick
saying
in.
these guys will, the people will buy these life
Right. So they'll buy them at it, so they'll offer you, a cash out,
I
which
get
is
it.
probably better than the cash value of the policy. So you get this cash up front that you might need. And then they go to the investor and say, hey, you want to buy this thing? And he or she would go, yeah, I'll check the health. They do a lot. They check their health. They send them to doctors and all this stuff. They figure, oh, he's got 6 years. That looks good for me. That's a good investment. And there are funds that have sprung up selling it where they pool these things. They securitize them. I mean, again, it's not an investment I would go into. I had one insurance expert told me, I said, well, what can go wrong with this stuff? He says, well, murder.
Yeah, I was going to say, they have a
He said it, I said, you're kidding me, right? He says, no. He said, I think, there are cases,
Yeah.
drinks the Kool-Aid and he's gone. So, I don't know.
Did you say you didn't, I don't know if I misheard you, long-term insurance, did you say you were not a fan of
No,
that?
we haven't gotten to that.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily, but I know a lot of people like that. So, but just going back to annuities, you can basically build your own. There's a lot of people out on the web that are showing you how to do that. Alan Roth again. If you go to Wealth Logic, he's got a combination where you take a 10-year CD and let's say you have 100,000. It's a typical annuity. Take 70,000, put it in a 10-year CD. The other 30,000 in total stock fund, Vanguard's total stock fund, or the S&P 500 if you want to be a little risky. At the end of the 10 years, you'd have your principal back. You'd get whatever the growth is in the stock fund. You're basically mimiking what you're going to get in an annuity without the cost or the complexity, and you have control of the money.
Good right now.
He cited one where you get 3.3% or something like that. You can find it. So, but you're not going to get much more on an annuity now.
Okay.
What are you going to get? 3.5, 4, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And wait a little. I mean, everybody's been saying interest rates are going to rise. They will. It's maybe not this year, but they are going to go back up.
But isn't this asking people to do just what you're saying we're all sick of doing, being yet one more step that we have to do ourselves rather than an expert doing?
Well, the question is, I would say yes, but the expert isn't necessarily acting in your best interest. If you're buying one of these things, sure, and that's how they get sold, is because you don't have to worry about anything, give me the money, the check comes in, you don't have to worry about anything. But in fact, you really do, because if circumstances change, if the money's gone, you can sometimes get out of these things, huge surrender fees. If you take too much, you sort of invalidate the guarantee. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that this can come back to bite you. So, yeah, I mean, is there an easy solution for these things? No, there isn't. But in terms of framing the conversation, I want you just to think more about holding their feet to the fire and tasks. That there are easier ways to do this stuff, but I think so many people are afraid or they don't understand. It looks very complicated, and it does, my point is it doesn't have to be. So it's more by saying it really doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need a 90-page prospectus to do this stuff. You want to make it simpler? People hate this, and I throw it out there. Say, why not just buy a 30-year treasury? You know.
Do you think that people would do either of those things? People aren't really buying annuities, right?
Oh no, they are.
So
Billions
they're
are
doing
being
it with their
sold.
lump sums. I mean, are they?
They're just buying them. You know, I mean, if you look at the LIMRA statistics, I mean, they're big business in those things. I mean, there's really a lot of growth in that because of fear. People are really worried about running out of money, so they are. No, they're selling them. They constantly tweak what they're selling, but they're selling them. Yeah, they they're out there pushing
Do you know
them.
what the percentage of people who are buying it when they retire?
I don't know that there would be a stat that, you know, I don't know anybody that would aggregate that or how they would aggregate it. But yeah, they're definitely getting bought.
Are annuities even regulated?
Yeah,
They are?
yeah.
Okay.
But by the states, because they're, you know, all the insurance companies are regulated individually. There was a
Okay.
push during the financial crisis to get a national regulator. I don't think that went anywhere. It's still,
Right.
it may be floating out there, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. The states don't really, they don't want it.
So if you live in a state where you've got a really good insurance regulator, then that's good. But
Possibly. I mean, look at Connecticut, where I'd say their regulator is probably okay, and Hartford almost created, you know, selling variable annuities that weren't designed well, and the whole company almost went under because of that. So, you know, where was the regulator during all that? I don't, you know. But that's another problem with annuities that people don't think about. You know, it's only as good as the strength of the insurance company. The insurance company runs into trouble, and you're gonna have to go to some payout funds and hope you get your money. So. Are there annuities that you might look at? Yeah, I mean, the ones that are probably the least hurtful, one sec, would be the single premium annuities where you just buy, you give them cash and you get money back. Or these new longevity annuities where you don't really get any payment, you know, you hang on to 85, you start getting money. But even those, I would say are not necessarily great. Yes?
I was going to mention Warren Buffett used to flog the Berkshire single premium
Right.
annuity. And I think it's disappeared. I'm not. Last time I went to look at it, I couldn't find it. They don't seem to be offering it anymore.
Right.
And my fantasy that I just made up was that because there's not much money in it, because all these other guys are selling these razzle-dazzle things with really high fees. But a case for annuities that I've heard recently is that there's some new research that by the time you hit 80, 50% of all of us have had enough cognitive decline that we really shouldn't trust ourselves with our own money.
Right.
So what a prudent person should do is go to the doctor once a year or whenever you go for your checkup, take the short-term memory
Right.
test, and when you start to fail, take all your cash and go buy a single premium annuity. And then you can't screw it up.
Right.
And the Berkshire one was really simple.
But
It was
then
based on the
you forget
Treasury
it's
script.
there,
It
right?
doesn't matter. You go to the mailbox every day, and
Your kids might forget.
one day out of 30, you have a check.
Probably you never know
So-
when you lost your mind.
Comes in handy.
Oh, yeah. then you
Yeah,
got
I mean,
kids stealing your
cognitive
money.
decline, that is a real issue, but that's
the
why.
cognitive decline, that's a case for the little sliver of good annuities out there that I've heard.
I'd rather you go to an advisor instead, find a good fiduciary, and have him or her manage your money then, in that case, and why let the insurance company do it? I mean, they're not your friends, and, you know, I'm going to call it MetLife, and they're going to worry about me. I'd much rather, I think there's a real place for financial advice, and what I would call holistic financial advice, because the other thing that's going on now is investment is really becoming commoditized, and the investment companies won't tell you that, because they want to push actively managed funds. But there's so much out there. You can basically, you can go to one of these sites, you know, the Better Million or Wealthfront or Sigfrid. They're all out there, and it's gotten, because of the algorithms you can do on the computers now, it's pretty much commoditized. You don't have to spend high fees. You don't have to get actively managed funds. You can build a pretty basic portfolio for not much money and very easy. So what I think the advisor does that brings another level of support to you, because again, going back to this idea, you're walking around with all these things on your shoulders. You're the actuarial and you're the medical guy. Is they can help you tie all this together if he or she is good by think about tax considerations, healthcare costs, long-term care costs, and fold all that in, because it's more than just about investing assets. That isn't really, that's just a part of it. but it's, you know, how you distribute all this and all the other things that come into play that are important. So I'm a big advocate of, you know, financial advisors, either asset under management model or using a certified financial planner every now and then just to get a look at your stuff, but I think it's really valuable. Let me try to finish up because I see we're running fast here. Mutual fund companies, just want to talk about them briefly. As we said earlier, look, most of their advice is framed around people who have money. It's the cohort that really doesn't have money that I think is really a huge risk here. So as you go forward here, you know, most of what they're going to tell you is, you know, these are people with investable assets, but there's a huge chunk of population out there that really doesn't have that, and they're kind of getting ignored in this conversation. And I'm not sure that there's a silver lining for that. Were you flagging me? No?
I was going to say you've got plenty of time.
Oh, okay.
Because you actually go to 11:45.
Oh, wow. Man. Yeah, I'm very windy, so this can go on for a long time. So that's one thing you're going to hear. So I would challenge them on that as they come through to say, how about for people who don't have money or investable assets? What about them? Their statistics tend to be focused on their population, not on a broader. So I often wonder how good they are. Like Fidelity always put out, hey, average amount of 401k is X, but it's only their people. They don't count it longer. I've also found, not singling them out, this is just stuff I've encountered over the years, a lot of their press releases don't add up if you question them. You go, oh, well, we didn't ask that, or, oh, that number doesn't measure that number. So I would challenge them on their stuff. I've seen that happen all too often.
Well, no, a guy from Prudential spoke last night who was good and interesting, but it just was very superficial. And when you tried to go deeper,
Right,
it just
they
wasn't
don't
there.
have it.
But people don't have money because they were unable to save, or because they did save. Do we even, or they're spending it, and so I'm a good saver, then have to pay for the person who enjoyed it while I was eating tuna casserole?
Well, there are people like that for sure, but there are also millions that just can't make it. I mean, they're in low-wage jobs, they're in minimum-wage jobs. You know, they have kids to support, or I mean, there's a million reasons out there. So I wouldn't say that everybody that doesn't have savings has been profligate. I don't think that. Sure, there are people like that, but I think there are millions here in this country now with the wage and the income disparities here that just can't earn that kind of money. I mean, I would throw that in the mix as we preface the whole discussion. Look at the 1%. The wage and income thing is enormous in this country now. I mean, it really is. It's really scary. And wages have been, I forget the stat, but they've been stagnant for how many years? I mean, there's been no real income growth for most workers, and for the lower cohort, it's really bleak. So I don't think they've been profligate.
And healthcare.
And healthcare. They haven't even, if they have to pay cash on that or haven't had it, I mean, it's just enormous stresses on the system that are all sort of coming together in this kind of stew. That's kind of scary. So I don't think it is, you were the turtle and you say, and then the other guy was running out and spending it. There certainly are people like that. There's no question. Why the insurance, insurance and mutual funds so interested in this stuff? Because it's really sticky money. I mean, there's trillions of it out there. I think the IRA 401k combination is somewhere around 10 trillion now. I mean, it's big money that's out there, and it's very sticky. I mean, how many times were you working out? How many times has your 401k plan administrator changed since you've been working at all? 5? Well, that's unusual.
They change it all the time, and it keeps getting worse.
Well, your company's a little different because it's privately held, and they're always
They were the
shifting
Vanguard
around.
for a while, but
Right.
they keep going back to these
Yeah.
banks with they kick back part of the fees to manage them.
Right. But in most cases, yeah.
And it
Since
was.
we've had at least 401ks as long as we've had.
Right.
I think it's.
The Herald,
Vanguard
but it
at
was
least
not
since
meant
1992. At least since 92.
But I take your point, it's not as often as they change insurance companies.
Right.
I mean, usually you get,
Oh,
you
yeah.
get your doctor dumped on you
Right.
every 2 or 3 years.
Sure, because they're cutting costs there. So this money is incredibly sticky, so they're really desperate to get it. Everybody wants a piece of this pie because the stuff almost never changes. So they have a real incentive to sell people on it and to have you gather assets. I mean, really, that's kind of what they want to do. And they figure in a 401k, a lot of plans you get bounced out when you turn 65 if you're not working there anymore. So you'll roll into an IRA. Great for them. It's another way to keep money under management and possibly charge higher fees. So again, when you're talking to these guys, just come with that mindset. Maybe you already had it, but that's kind of the way I'm seeing it. It's all framed around things I've just seen over the last number of years and really see now kind of in the wheelhouse that I'm in. Question? Okay. Glide paths. That's another one of these things you're going to get hit with all the time. You know, the so-called glide path in the 30 years and, you know. The glide path. This is what they talk about, taking assets out in retirement. You're going to have this glide path that sort of goes down, and there'll be an argument: is it 4%? Is it 2%? Is it 5%? Is
What
it
does it mean?
6%?
What is the term?
It's
glide
just
path mean?
it's a way of taking out assets that you will basically come to zero either at X amount of years, presumably.
So it's a good thing. I mean,
It's a good thing if you can realistically.
Oh, so they're saying, here's your glide path.
Here's your glide path.
And
There'll be a lot
nobody
of
can really
studies.
predict that glide
And-
path.
Who's saying this, though?
Insurance companies,
Who's that?
investment companies, researchers. I mean, there's all sorts of research out there. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I'm just saying I still question. I wake up now saying, is this really the conversation? Because I don't think most people can. Who saw the financial crisis coming in 2008? I mean, Soros, I guess. Maybe he's the only one. And that was just luck. He happened to hit that button instead of another, and it worked out. But, I mean, how many people knew where you... How many people here today thought you would have... If I asked you 5 years ago, you'd be sitting here today?
Right.
None. You can't. You just can't know that. No one knew that, the Russians were going into Ukraine. I mean, you can't predict this stuff. So to say, again, it comes back to what I was saying at the beginning, 30 years and you're going to make an accurate assessment of things? And I'm not saying I have the answer, but I think it's a reframing of the conversation. I don't think that, to sell people that you can realistically do this with a high degree of confidence, I just,
Are you
I
talking
wonder.
about distribution? I mean, like percentage?
Yeah, basically, let's say, it's down the math. I have $100. I want it to last 30 years. How much can I take out every year?
So like the 4%
Yeah, right.
formula.
And sort of glide down to stuff, since you don't know what your health
What
care
is the alternative to that? I mean, just calibrating every year? I mean, you have to kind of figure out. something.
Well, I think my spin on it would be is getting back to this is spending goes hand in hand, and that doesn't get talked about because there's no money in that. They're not managing your spending; you're only managing your saving. So that's really goes hand in hand with this conversation. Look, if you have $100 and that's what you're going to have, and it has to last for 30 years, like I said, do the math. You get X amount every year. If you can invest more or steal it, maybe you get a little more to spend, but that's what you're going to have. So you really have to look at that, and I don't think there's enough discussion about that or enough sort of reality on that. I mean, it goes back on, it's easy for me to say, I don't have kids in college now, but, I think tougher conversations need to be had on college debt. Tell kids today, we can't pay for your college. You're going to have to do the community college and then trade up for the last 2 years. I mean, I think coming out of school with big debt is a disaster. You're just going to be ruined. I was talking to his cousin over the weekend, and she went undergrad, and then she's an acupuncturist now. She told me she had 12 loans. 12. She had 12 loans. I don't know what the aggregate amount. She didn't tell me what the amount was.
And she's in undergrad still?
She's out.
Oh, she's out.
She's an acupuncturist, set up her own practice. Apparently it's doing really well. But have to do really well.
Yeah.
So where is the money coming to buy the house or save? I mean, it's just crushing. So, but again, look, everybody loves their kids. They want them to do the best. They want them to send them to the best possible school. So either they'll raid their 401k or they won't save and they'll put it in there. And the student will take out all this debt, and then they're just crushed. They're just crushed.
How many instances do you see of people who have raided their 401k or their retirement funds of some other sort to pay for their kids' college?
I could look at the data. I mean, it's not an overwhelming, but it's a big enough chunk. I mean, but again, the idea is just don't do it. I mean, people say, you got to pay yourself first. And I think that's another hard lesson for people, and it's hard medicine. They don't like to hear it. Do you have any student loans? No. Do your folks pay for it?
Nope.
You pay for it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There was a story, remember recently within the last month that showed that because of this big student debt, the younger cohort weren't, buying homes.
Right.
They weren't rushing to have children, which may not be so bad, but,
Well, it is actually.
Bad for the economy.
Bad for the economy. I mean, we need.
All this frugality is great for people,
Right.
and it's great advice, but my spending is your income, so it's really bad for the economy.
No.
if everyone
Or
does it.
stock portfolio.
For a stock portfolio.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, there's definitely, I mean, they're all interconnected in that sense.
Forming a household is the single biggest economic event in anybody's life.
Yeah.
So all this postponing
Right.
is really, and it's gonna hurt our investment returns.
So, look,
So, all right, but so let's put that into context. You're saying on one hand, don't dip into your own funds to pay your
Right.
kids' student loans or
Right.
education. But on the other hand, if my kid graduates from college with a huge debt, she's not gonna be buying a house or spending a lot of money on clothes or going out to
Right.
eat a lot, because she's gonna have that. So how do you balance all that?
well, you can't. I mean, I'm not here to solve the,
But he is
and
saying-
you're not.
Oh, you're not?
No.
No, but you did say it is a bit matter of lowering expectations, which is
Expectations.
really hard to do, because I am at that level where they're going to
Right.
college.
Yeah.
Send your kid to a community college for
Yeah.
2 years and then go on for a 2-year. That is really good in theory and incredibly hard to do in
Super hard.
practice. I mean, it's especially depending what
Super
community
hard.
you live in. So I would have advised
Yeah.
that until my kids start going
Right.
to college.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
that's
what
the
I know.
reality. I
Well,
just
then you're
think
usually like having to take extra classes once you get to the 4-year school to catch up anyway.
also, it's just a
Also,
different
yeah.
experience, and if you've had
Right.
one experience, you don't have. I mean,
Right.
it's very good for some kids, but I'd say that is one of the toughest things I think.
Or
to
state
advocate.
schools versus, you know, the fancy private school, that's twice the thing. I mean, look, when I went to college, there was never any discussion what was I going to do after. It was the pursuit of knowledge, and I went to liberal arts college, and inquiry, and thought, and writing, and all this. And no one, now everybody, because it's so expensive, everyone wants a return on their investment. You know, what kind of job am I going to get when I get out? Believe me, no one thought about that. You know, we
I
were,
feel sorry for millennials because when I went to university 25 years ago, it was just fun, like you say, you know, but you
Right.
can't enjoy yourself now.
They're having
Well,
fun.
yeah.
He's having
Well, I'm sure they're
fun.
having fun. Yeah.
I hear about plenty of fun.
I'm sure they're having fun, but, you know,
It's more stressful.
it was never a return on investment. You know, it was never that kind of thing. And my parents, you know, they pretty much paid for it all.
A
And I
lot more
didn't
Americans
have to worry
work
about
for
it.
in college, I don't know, they graduate in their 30s.
So they take them 5 years to graduate or 6, and
that
then they have to go on to graduate
really
school.
increases the dropout rate.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of universities are making kids stay longer. I mean, they're pushing I can't tell you how many kids I know who've had to go 4.5 to 5 years because they're telling them, no, don't take 18 hours in the first semester, only take 12, because it's really stressful, and that pulls it all out, which obviously
But
builds
sometimes they can't
confidence.
take classes they need, so they have to do that.
You know, it depends in Florida because I guess there's also a lot of young people. What's happening is they're really trying to rush the kids through, so you have to take summer courses, at least one summer, just to be able to clear out the debts.
In 4 years? To
In
get
4
out in 4 years?
I mean,
See, but
sometimes
that's
it takes
almost like-
longer if you're double majoring or something.
But that's almost like going 4.5 years or 5 years if you're taking summer courses. I mean,
Okay, but to loop it back to, you know, the education seminars next week, but in terms of retirement.
It's
uh,
our
About
call.
that glide thing though, I wanted to know your opinion more. So do you think when they say they're coming, they've dropped, it used to be like 6% or something, now they're saying 4%,
Oh.
that you could withdraw your money at a rate of
Well, even now,
4%?
4 suspect they're saying 2 and 3 because of the interest rate environment. I mean, the point is, no matter where you set it wherever you set it, I think the conversation is more about, is that really, whatever it is it really realistic to people to expect to survive in that? Because that brings up,
The thing about that, and underlying a lot of this, it seems to me, is a discussion about math.
right.
And
That's a
people
good point.
eyes glazing over on math. And the glide path discussion is very simple, you know? How much you're gonna take out, how much you're gonna spend, and how much is it gonna grow? But then people's eyes
Yes,
glaze
you're
over
right.
when it's simple 8th grade math. But part of the problem, it seems to me, is people don't wanna talk about 8th grade math.
No, they don't, and they can't do it. That was what I was getting. I said, you have $100, you're going to live this long, this is what you have. I was at an ICI seminar.
I was trying to ask was, are you arguing that 2% or 3% is the wrong number?
No.
That's what I was trying to
I'm not.
ask.
I don't know
Sorry.
what the right number is. I'm arguing that the whole conversation about it, as you were saying,
But you have
is just,
some number.
But that's
You
the
do.
issue. Everybody
Yeah.
wants a number.
no, they want a
And
number.
it's really simple,
Yeah.
if you do a little 8th grade math, to figure out what's reasonable, I think. But everybody
And-
wants a number, give me the answer.
Well, and it comes back to spending and trying to figure out what
What's
your spending is
reasonable
going
for
to
your
be. So
individual.
that's why I keep coming back to that. I was at an ICI, the Investment Company Institute. They did a retirement seminar a couple of weeks ago, and they put up this little pop quiz on math, and they said, you know, they asked how many people in the audience, you know, if you had $100 and you got 5% simple interest, where would it be in, X amount of years? And most people got it wrong. And when they told you what it was in the general population, like 80% got it wrong. It was just like real simple math questions. So people don't have a real understanding of that or a real stomach for it or tolerance for it. So I think we do clutter up the conversation. That's what I was trying to bring home. It all comes around together, with fancy insurance products and annuities and all that. They clutter up the conversation with a lot of stuff that's just way beyond the tolerance of most people to absorb it. And I think it would be our collective responsibility is to sort of simplify that. So one last point on sort of the glide path in spending and retirement. At that same seminar, they were talking about healthcare costs in retirement. And it turns out, at least according to this one researcher, they're pretty stable for most of retirement. They're not all that big, but then they'll spike up in the last year or two of life. And that's really the huge, they'll just spike then as you start to decline. And there was a question about long-term care insurance. Personally, I'm not a fan because you're paying a lot of money for pretty much a limited benefit. And there's big elimination periods on it, so you may spend, you'll get a total benefit of, let's say, $300,000, but it'll, and it caps too. You only get like 2 or 3 years of coverage. So the question is, about long-term care insurance, is it a good buy or not? And generally, I don't think it necessarily is, particularly if you can self-insure, and by that I mean, pay the assisted living facility when you get to it. Again, with this idea of the glide path, you don't know when you're going to hit it. You may never. My dad's a good example. He died at 84. He was at home most of the time, and then he didn't have long-term care insurance, and he got diagnosed with cancer, and he went into assisted living, and he lasted 9 months. So he basically was paying it out of savings. So you're going to pay a lot of premium for a benefit you may never. But I get why people want it. I mean,
Because on the flip side of that, if you're depending on Medicare,
right.
to
It's not
pay,
gonna cover it.
Medicare's not going to cover
Not
you
gonna cover it.
for all that stuff. And then if you do get a debilitating or chronic
Yeah.
thing and you have to turn to Medicaid,
Right.
you have to bankrupt yourself in
Right.
order to do that. So I see a real push and pull there.
There is a push and pull. That's why I said I don't think it's a flat decision. But of course, once that burns out, you're done anyway. So let's say you live longer than the benefit.
Aren't they changing the premiums too on long-term care? Because I've heard a lot of complaints from people that, well, I had it at this, and then the premium
Sure, well,
really shot way up.
Well, they can. That's the other thing they can do. They can raise it. You're only good in the band that you're in. As you age up, they can jack it, and they can do it at whatever rate you want. So basically what you can do is pay it or cancel. Now, some of them have return of premium. I mean, there's all sorts of flavors of this stuff, but for every sort of protection you get, they're going to charge you a lot more. They just don't say, oh, yeah, sure, we'll give you the premium back. They'll charge you a lot more up front. So, again, it comes back to that broader conversation of really trying to get an accurate handle. Are you really going to last that long? And in 30 years, is the landscape here going to look the same? I don't think so. I really think there's going to be some real fundamental shifts, and if we get that conversation going, because most of it's unsustainable. Just as it is with college costs, it's unsustainable. It's a broken system, so something's going to have to come up to replace it, I think.
Can I,
Please.
are you going to talk anything about reversing?
I've just on it. My other questionable stuff.
Okay.
On long-term care, have you dug into the ones that are offered through employers?
Haven't.
They're allegedly a lot cheaper, just like life insurance is. And,
Right.
The one comes for free. If you want to get 4 times your salary, it's something out of every paycheck. Have you looked into those at all?
I haven't, and it sounds like that could be a good story. I'd be surprised a lot of employers would want to do that. That just sounds like a minefield if you're an employer, because it's just going to be all sorts of problems and complaints with these things. I can't really imagine many employers wanting to do that. I mean, the AARP, which we're very age friendly, we don't have a product like that. So we still have a pension.
It's part of the standard package. You can, Aflac sends a thing, sells a
Oh.
thing.
They're all affiliated.
Yeah, they're affiliated, but they're not.
It's a marketing.
It's a marketing
It's a
thing. It's
marketing
not
thing.
something that they're really deeply involved in. I mean, they're just kind of
Right, it's
shunting
just-
you off doing it. So I mean, it's the
They
same
pay part
thing.
of it and you pay the rest.
Right. But
Yeah, okay.
but once you leave employment, then you've got to pick up the whole thing.
Oh, yeah,
so
it's gone the minute
it's
you
gone.
get laid off. Yeah.
So other things that I think are problem areas that are worthy to write about would be reverse mortgages, which I think generally are a bad deal. If you need that kind of money, my advice would be sell the house.
Right.
And that gets back to spending
So
less in
basically,
retirement.
you're sort of, you're deeding the house over to
Sure.
whoever takes the right?
Right, and you still have to maintain the upkeep, you have to pay
Oh,
taxes.
Right. But you get to live in it.
You get to live in it.
And draw money from your equity.
Right, but if it comes to that you need that kind of money, the chances are you're gonna burn through that money. That's
Right.
the problem, and
Is
that's
this
what
what they
happens.
call endowment mortgages in the UK?
I don't know, but I'm guessing it's,
Rather than pay off the loan, you pay into a separate thing which matures. after-
no, actually, this is different. You actually own the house, so you're getting, basically, you're freeing up your equity instead of selling it. The bank's coming and saying, okay, you have 100,000 in equity, we'll give you 60,000 up front. And instead of paying it back, they just add it to the balance. And then when the house comes due, when you move out of the house and you sell it, the bank claims all the money. But you no longer own it. You're going to get much less equity out of it than you think. The fees are high on that. And my fear is that for a lot of people, they're going to wind up spending that money and then they're stuck, or they don't maintain the house. There's also been other problems where you have to be, first of all, you have to be 62 to qualify. So one of the tricks that have been going on, let's say this one spouse is under that, they tell them to deed the house over to the older spouse. Then that person dies, and they're claiming now that it's due because you didn't own the house anymore. You're not on the deed. So there's been litigation against that. There's been cases of people losing their house. So it's bad. The only time I would recommend that, and Jane Bryan Quinn has written about this, and others, is if you really don't need the money, take it as a line of credit, which will continue to grow. And then if you wanted to use it for, let's say down the line, some unforeseen healthcare cost or a vacation or something like that, sure, it's a great way to tap it. But that's only if you don't need it. Most of the people that go to grab these things is because they really need the money.
Well, why wouldn't you just take a HELOC out then?
You could, but you have to pay that back. So what most people are doing, they're trying to reduce their expenses in retirement. With these things, you're not paying anything. They've given you the money. It's just adding to the balance. So the bank gets the money when the house is sold. With a HELOC, you're going to have to pay it back every month, and if you don't have the money, you're going to run into default eventually.
You still have to live in the house though on that.
Yes.
Corner. So like if I got sick, broke my hip, had to go
Right.
to assisted living, that's where.
That triggers it. The deal is until you die or want to sell the house or permanently move away, and then they'll reclaim them. It's a very small market. I think only 15,000 of these were made last year, and a lot of the banks have gotten out of that. They're not really, making these things as much as they are as they did in the past. So I think there's other things you should look at before you go to that.
Was it typically done because one of the couple would have to go to nursing care and they need the money?
That, or they didn't have enough money. They just didn't have enough money, or again, maybe they were spending too much, or they just, they were lucky. They bought an expensive house, they paid it off, and they just didn't have enough to live on, or what they thought. So they'll go to that, and it's dangled as, it's a real pot of money, and you don't really have to do anything, but it's a problem. Other kinds of investments that I think, self-directed IRAs, I think are also bad news, and they get pitched a lot. And what are those? Everybody familiar with those?
No.
Okay, a self-directed IRA. The IRAs you have now, most of you, they're run by the mutual fund company. You pick from their menus of investments. If you want a self-directed one, you can go to a third party who acts as a custodian, and then you can invest in anything you want. Movie pictures, jewelry, art, any kind of investment you want, with a few exceptions. You can't. Bitcoin, real estate, as long as you don't live in it. And they get touted often as ways you can make a lot more because you're controlling investment. You can invest in these alternative things.
You're basically acting as your own fund manager.
Right, but not even investing in funds. I mean, this is generally to
Right.
buy alternative type of investments. You think, you're going to buy this house and, rent it out, and it's going to make tons of money, and then when you sell it, it's going to, you'll get a huge profit. Very speculative stuff. There are high fees with that, the custodian on it. It's very easy to trip up and fall afoul of the IRS regulations on that. And if you do, then the whole thing becomes a taxable event. It's considered a withdrawal. But they get pitched a lot. And the last one on that is, these alternative investments, Bitcoin. My wife was saying the other day, shouldn't we be in Bitcoin? I'm going, oh my God, no. I mean, these things are really speculative. Inverse funds, you get here pitched a lot. Because people are desperate for yield. They want that income, so they look at these things and say, oh, this is great. And they get, the people selling them are very smooth. They're very good about telling you, these are great things, and they're not.
What's that you're talking about now, Pete?
Inverse funds.
Inverse funds.
Right, so if the market's, they're designed, if the market's going up, they're going to go opposite, let's say if the market's going down, they're going to go up by leveraging the money. Anytime you hear leverage, run away. Leverage is a bad word for most people. So. Then a couple of resources. As long as here I want to tout the AARP. We have Public Policy Institute and research. It's all there. You can link to it from the website. Our media relations people will set you up really fast, but there's really a ton of stuff on there, and it's easy to get a spokesperson to, or I mean a source if you want. If you're discussing any of these things, they'll line somebody up for you. A lot of good research on there. It's all free, so I'd urge you to take a look. Sorry, in previous years I didn't look as much there as probably I should have because a lot of it is there. Another guy I'm a big fan of is Michael Kitches. Are you familiar with him? I think he's got a lot of sort of counterintuitive. He gives advice to financial planners, and his blog is called The Nerd's Eye View. So it's generally aimed at the practitioner, but there's a lot of counterintuitive stuff on there. Kitches, K-I-T, thinking it's C-H-E-S. Nerd's Eye View, if you Google that, it'll pop up and you can get his newsletter. It's out every day. There's a big weekly reading thing. Again, it's skewed at advisors, but the tips in there I think are pretty good. The other one I'm a big fan is Mary Beth Franklin at Investment News on Social Security. I mean, she's flat out,
We're ready to hear from her.
Good.
I think tomorrow.
She's great. Another blog I like is The Oblivious Investor. Is a good one to get stuff on. I think he writes for the common man. And then last, just story ideas that I think you can't write about too often, just from what I hear internally, is Social Security and claiming strategies. I mean, it's incredibly complex. You'd think, here's something that's really easy, and yet it's really complex. We had financial engines, and not too long ago, they claimed there's like 8,000 different combinations, which is sort of true, but they were doing it like, what month you were taking it, so they kind of skewed it. Oh, it goes back to them, they're skewing stuff. But it's very complicated. And now with these other ideas of, filing and suspending, I think they're great stories. I think the readers would be very interested in it. Same thing about Medicare, again, really complicated. When you file, if you're late on it and your income in a certain year can change your premium. I mean, it's very complicated. I don't think you can write too much about that.
And with that, if you mess up early, it affects you
forever.
permanently. So
Forever.
those are really important stories, I think.
So I don't think you can overwrite those because, like most people, nobody pays attention to it until they get close to it, and then they said, "Oh my God." The Roth versus traditional IRAs is real good. I think that comes up a lot. I think for younger people, Roth is the way to go. I think for older, if you've got big balances in a traditional, it's then becomes more problematic because you have to pay the taxes up in front. Everyone's familiar with the difference for a Roth and a traditional? Yes?
It's fine to explain it.
Okay. Traditional IRA or traditional 401k for that matter, you're deferring the taxes. Basically, you're putting in pre-tax money, so the stuff can cook for years and years, and then when you take it out, you're going to get taxed on the gain. And the theory's always been you'll be in a lower tax bracket. Probably, but who knows? Again, if you're spending 100%, if you want to do it 100%, you're not going to be in a lower tax bracket. But was traditionally the same. Then a new flavor came out, the Roth. There's a 401k variety and an IRA variety. You're putting in post-tax dollars, so anything you put in, any of the gains are tax-free. So if you're younger, it's pretty good because, again, the theory is you're not making that much. So your taxes probably aren't that high, so you don't need the tax advantage, and maybe you don't own a house, or you don't have these other tax advantages. So put that money in now because it can really cook, and you can have tons of money. There are a few other wrinkles that make the Roth attractive. There's no required minimum distribution. That's the other thing. The government says, on the traditional one, saying, okay, we'll let you defer your taxes, but we want a share of that. This isn't going to go on forever. So they have required minimum distributions. When you turn 70.5, you have to start taking money out, and there's an IRS table telling you how much you have to take out. With a Roth, you don't have to do that. That thing can cook forever, and you never have to take any. So you can bequeath it to somebody. If you never need the money and bequeath it, they can get this big pile of cash, pretty much tax-free. So.
I'm just curious, what are you defining as younger versus older?
Under 35, under 40. I mean, somebody who's not in kind of their peak earning years, unless you're a tech magnet, then it's a different thing. Then you get into other questions. I think for younger people, until their salaries really start going up, or do a combination I mean, it doesn't have to be all or one. You can split this stuff too. Now, a lot of companies don't offer a Roth 401k. It's kind of in the minority, but the ones that do, you can split the amount. You don't have to.
You can do it on your own too.
You could.
Even if your employer doesn't.
Right. And of course, if you're self-employed, that's even better. You can do a SEP and pump a lot more cash
Do
in.
you roll over traditional 401k into a Roth?
You're going to get taxed.
They are.
Right. So don't.
Okay, so there's no way to.
No, you're
But
going to
it was a
tax.
great
Just
idea in
flip
2008.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if your
'Cause the
balance
values
went
were
way
down.
down, you can roll it over and you're
Right.
taxed on the low amount.
Yeah.
And then when it comes back up, it's
I wait
taxed.
for another.
The other trick the government does is they don't. So let's say there's this thing called a backdoor Roth, where let's say if you earn, there are income limits also on what you can contribute to a Roth. So if you're over a certain amount, you can. So the theory was you would open a traditional IRA, and immediately convert it, because they changed that in 2009, I believe, where there were no income limits. There's no caps on that, so you can convert it. So let's say I'd open a regular Roth, put my $5,500 in there, and then I would immediately convert it to a Roth. That sounds great. However, what the government does is they look at all the value of all your IRAs, your traditional ones, and that's what they calculate the tax on. So it could be a huge tax bill to transfer a little bit of money. So my sense of it is it's not generally a great idea if you've got big balances in a traditional IRA to run off and do the Roth, because you're going to have to take a lot of years of investing prowess to get back what you're paying in taxes. You'll hear that argued other ways. That's just my sense of it. But in terms of stories, I don't think you can write too much about it, because this comes up all the time. I mean, just in my wheelhouse, it's just a key issue for folks. And the last one, which I know I'm a broken horse on this, is just more stories on how to reduce spending sensibly, not the cutting out the lottery kind of
reduce
thing.
what?
Spending.
Oh, okay.
Because I think that's just such a key component. Everything you're going to hear about today, this week, is going to be accumulation and savings, not so much about spending. And I think without that, the thing, it just falls apart. So.
So I'm gonna get back to that, 'cause I like to, like a dog with a bone, but on that withdrawal, so what you're saying is don't focus so much on the 2 to 4%, but more so on what could I cut back in retirement?
Well, find out, the conversation is really, what is it you're going to need in retirement, and try to come up with some sort of idea of what's realistic for you in retirement, and then judge it against what kind of assets you have times the amount of years you think you're going to live, which of course no one knows. If everybody in your family died of heart disease, you might have a really good chance of it, and maybe you're not going to make it to 90. But I think the way for most people now, I think the stats, if you make it to 65, you're probably going to live another 20 years. There's a pretty good chance of that, and for women, it could even be 30. And it goes back again to what I was saying. I mean, I don't think there's any realistic way you can today sit down and say I can comfortably plan for 30 years in retirement. I just think that's a broken saw, or an old saw, or a broken record, whatever the cliche is. So I think we need to pivot the conversation to other kinds of things, that you're going to have to work longer or look at other things that make that mix, because I don't think you can throw a switch. And yet so much of the financial services industry is geared around that. It's like a big oil tanker. It's moving down there. It's really hard to get it off course on that. That's what they do. That's what they know. So.
I don't know if you've read the book. I would recommend it, Pound Foolish.
Yeah,
by
I have read
Nolan.
it.
I just think, I don't know, I mean,
Yeah.
it has a very specific point of
Yeah.
view, and a lot of people might disagree with it. I've interviewed her a couple of times. I just think it's one of the first books I saw. She writes for The Guardian and Reuters, and I think it's right, that really says the thing like how this is, a lot of this has been shifted to the individual in terms of cut out your lattes,
Right.
cut out correct me if I'm wrong, instead of, we have to look at, her point is public policy has made it so difficult to save, and a lot of other things, but I just think it's a really good perspective we don't hear very often.
What did you say was the other?
Helene, it's like Helene Olin, O-L-E-N
Yeah.
is the last name.
It was out 3 years ago, maybe.
Something like
It's
that.
definitely in print.
No, it's out there. And she blogs.
What I'm really struck by is that most of your don'ts, and most of your things to watch out for, is precisely what all of our public pensions are doing. They're chasing yield in alternative investments. They're making massive use of leverage under this risk parity thing to gamble in treasuries. Their glide path is wrong. They're all up at 7 3/4 to 8% rate of return assumption. Warren Buffett thinks it ought to be about 5.5, or Moody says it should be 5.5. Buffett says if he was running a pension himself, he wouldn't promise anybody more than 6. So.
And that's why they're going back to cut the benefits. Yeah, I mean, that's a
Right,
perfect
so-
example. I mean, I
So
think
maybe we're
they're,
obligated to tell public employees, your benefits, don't count on those benefits.
I think you
Because
should.
the masters of the universe running your pensions are screwing up.
But then it becomes a political and policy issue. And look at the politicians. I mean, they only think as far as the next election. Nobody wants to stand up. I mean, it takes a bankruptcy in Detroit
But
to
the
get them to
usual
change.
find, folks, when they say, well, gosh, if you need this much money and you can take out 4% or 3% or 2%, a big part of that is looking at what the return assumption is.
Right.
If they say, gosh, for 100 years the S&P 500 went up at 10% a year, everybody's saying no, that's probably not going to happen.
Right.
So this expectation, these people promising consumers that they're going to make them a lot of money, drives that glide path train a lot.
It's not. I mean, look at the discussion. There was Robert Schiller, you know him from the Case Shiller Index. He just had a story out the other day saying, real estate, this whole argument of should you buy or rent. And he was saying from 1890 to 1990, I mean, the growth, the real appreciation of house prices was minimal. So that sounds great, but who lives 100 years? So to me, it seemed like kind of, in a way, an idiotic argument, because I can tell you, for people who bought houses, during the run-up, they were making boatloads of money. The fact that they, maybe spent it all or traded up, that's a different argument. But to say that housing never appreciates or never appreciates in the window that's going to make it, valuable to you, I think it's just a spurious argument. Yeah, if I look at 100 years of stuff, but I'm not going to be in a house for 100 years. So I think you have to look at everything in the context of what's going on. The other thing about yield, people never talk about it, and you got to look at after-tax return. That's really what's key. And people, mutual fund companies almost never talk about that. People don't really think about after-tax return. Our blogger, Alan Roth, the other day was talking about, people saying that yield is returns are low now, interest rates are low. But he said if you looked at the time when interest rates were maybe 13%, inflation was 13%. So actually on an after-tax or a real return function, it doesn't look so bad now. But that's an argument that never plays, because people say, I'm only getting 1% of my money, and they never think the other way. People are really bad on inflation. I am too. The Hershey bar keeps shrinking, but you never really realize it until it's 20 years down the line. But that's a real thing. I mean, it's a very real thing. So you have to remind people that. It's easy to forget.
The question I have is, I know of somebody who retired from, or her husband retired from AT&T, and incredible benefits. He was an officer and so on, and it was all great till about 2008. And the way I guess they had invested, they had 2 homes, one in Miami, one in Jersey, and then they weren't making a lot of money. So in a case like that, if you can continue working, do you sit out the bad market until it goes up? Or
Yeah.
if you have a choice, or
Sure.
if you have a lot of money? Or
I mean, again, if you have that kind of flexibility, yeah. I mean, definitely you want to try to ride it out. I mean, that's, again, the single most important thing you can. That's why I would be pitching financial advisors. If they do nothing else, they help you from acting against your own worst instinct. If you look at all the behavioral finance stuff, it says, we always go for the wrong choice. If you lose 10% on something, you feel a lot worse than if you made 20. I mean, it's just human reaction. Oh my God, I lost the 10%. It's awful. The 20 feels good, but the effect of that goes away real fast. So, yes, why not keep working? The bigger question for me is, I know the 2 houses are nice, and I know it's easy for me to say, but is that something that they really want to have throughout
for a
retirement?
year it was great, to have
Right. And that's if there's one takeaway, that's how I want kind of to reframe the conversation, because otherwise, it's not going to work for a lot of people.
One thing that, in terms of spending, that you touched on it a little bit, but it's fees. I mean, you spend on fees, and they're really hard sometimes to get at. Even with the new
Right.
DOL regulations on 401k fee disclosure, it's still difficult to parse that.
Yeah, my own view, again, just talking me, I think there's too much attention, too much hand-wringing over the fees and not enough about, the saving. You know, if I go and ask people, are they saving them, are they maxing out on their 401k? No, I couldn't, I don't want to do it. You know, the employer match, I'm not taking it. If you do those first, then let's have a conversation about the fees. I don't think the
Yeah.
fees come before the saving.
Yeah.
And there's just so much hand-wringing over that. But that is one reason why I'm against sort of insurance and other kinds of complicated products, because they do have high fees. I think on the 401k side, fees are coming down. Another smarter person than me said, yeah, they may be high compared to what? You know, we always say they're high, but we never say compared to what. And that, I think, is actually a pretty good question to ask. So, yeah, I think fees can be a problem. And I know Helene focuses a lot on that in her book. I mean, that's a big stripe or big theory of hers. But I would say, let's start putting the money away then, and we can attack the fees. But I wouldn't say that's a reason not to do it. Somebody, oh, these fees are too high, I won't put it. No, it doesn't. I think the tax advantages and the company match trump that any day of the week, I think.
All right, on that note,
Well,
we
I
are
hope it's
going to
been helpful.
close.
Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
thanks.
Rick, I'm going to present you also with the FMYK.